Edrin Vale stared at the holographic memo floating above his desk and wondered, with quiet despair, which forgotten ancestor he must have offended for the universe to gift him this particular nightmare. The message spun lazily in the air, each word glowing with the smug finality of bureaucratic decree. Assignment, Sole Representative, Arkili Royal Confluence Ceremony. Departure, 0600, Orbital Gate 7. 8 years of his diplomatic career had been spent negotiating mineral taxes on hollowed-out asteroids, glorious spreadsheets, predictable debates, mild bickering about cobalt inventories. That was the good life. Everything was safe. Everything was controlled. Nobody needed him to smile diplomatically at creatures who might instinctively bite. Nobody expected him to stand in for the entire human species at an alien royal wedding hosted by a civilization older than Earth's first pyramids. This is, definitely a mistake, he muttered to his empty office. The hologram offered no sympathy, it simply rotated smugly. Edrin flicked through the cultural briefing files, feeling his stomach sink with every page. The Arkili, whose palaces were grown from resonance-sensitive crystal, hosted ceremonies lasting 6 straight hours. Their guest list included beings who lived in methane oceans, entities composed of magnetic dust, and one species the notes simply referred to as, "Don't look directly at them." Then came the warnings, always a great sign. Sanyuri aristocrats will be present. Maintain at least 3 meters of distance. Do not accept private invitations. Avoid direct skin contact. Do not consume liquids offered personally by Sanyuri nobles. Everyone in the galaxy had heard of the Sanyuri. They weren't quite vampires, but they'd mastered biological immortality back when humans were still sharpening bronze. Pale skin, red-lit eyes, charming smiles that reportedly made diplomats sweat through their shirts. The briefing even included a photo of one Sanyuri noblewoman, the expression of someone who had survived more wars, affairs, and scandals than human history had pages. Great, Edrin said. Space aristocrat vampires. Add that to the resume. He spent the next 3 days preparing while drifting in a fog of low-level panic. He practiced Arkili greetings in the mirror until his tongue begged for mercy. He studied diagrams of alien hand signals, desperately trying to remember which gestures meant polite greeting and which meant "I challenge your bloodline." He even bought new shoes, he had a feeling his old ones would embarrass humanity. The night before departure, his friend and colleague, Mara Ling, arrived at his apartment with whiskey and the blunt honesty of someone who didn't fear hurting his feelings. "You look like someone told you the sun is being repossessed," she said, plopping onto the couch between stacks of datapads. "I feel like it," Edrin groaned. "They expect me to give a formal toast. In High Arkili. High Arkili. I can barely order dumplings in it. Just don't start any wars. That's literally all you need to do." Mara poured 2 glasses. "Besides, they picked you because you're perfect for a low-stakes ceremonial gig. You're calm. You're unthreatening. You're human wallpaper. That's supposed to help. You asked why they picked you over Director Kuhn. There's your answer. You exist politely. Now go exist politely at the wedding and come home." Edrin really hoped she was right. But Mara didn't see the warnings about Sanyuri, incident potential, printed in bold. She didn't see the diagrams showing how casual touch could cause, well, side effects no diplomat wanted to explain to their supervisor. The hyperspace transport to Arkili's Prime took 18 hours, 18 hours Edrin spent imagining ways things could go wrong. He shared the cabin with a Centauri merchant and 3 insectoid delegates, all of whom completely ignored him. Somehow that increased his sense of doom. But the moment they dropped out of hyperspace, everything changed. Arkili's Prime filled the viewport like a cosmic jewel, its surface covered in crystalline forests and sweeping light-catching cities laid out in interlocking spirals. Structures refracted the twin suns in colors his eyes had no names for. "First time," the pilot said over comms. Edrin nodded numbly. "They've been building for 12,000 years. That palace started construction when humans were still domestically arguing about wheat farming. Fantastic, Edrin whispered. No pressure at all. They landed on a platform jutting from a crystalline cliff face. The palace rose above them, a vast, prismatic cathedral of living crystal that hummed with soft emotional resonance. When he stepped out, the air carried a sweet floral scent mixed with something that whispered, "You are very far from home." A scale-clad Archeli attendant materialized with graceful movements, their bodies shifting in soft rainbow hues. Delegate Vale. Your arrival is timely. The confluence begins in 2 hours. T2 hours. Edrin squeaked. Great. Plenty of time to panic in private. Inside, the palace hallways subtly reshaped themselves as he walked, breathing with internal light. He tried not to think about whether the palace was alive. The ceremonial chamber was the single most impossible thing he had ever seen. The ceiling soared upward in shimmering arches. Whispered conversations from impossibly far away brushed his ears like someone standing beside him. Pillars resembling frozen trees rippled with iridescent colors. Bioluminescent flowers shifted hues with the breathing of the crowd. He found the human delegation section, which was one chair. One single chair. Humanity apparently ranked just above houseplant in seating importance. At least no one will fight me for elbow space, he whispered, then felt ridiculous for talking to furniture. And then the guests arrived. Methane-breathing beings drifting in sealed environmental pods. A crystalline entity whose limbs chimed like glass wind bells. A furry silver-coated delegation conversing in gentle musical harmonies. It was like being dropped into a cosmic zoo where everything was sapient and at least twice as interesting as him. Then the music began, not sound exactly, but vibration that bypassed hearing and went straight into his bones. Notes he felt in his ribs, tones that shimmered along his spine. It felt religious, though he wasn't sure for whom. The Archeli bride and groom appeared through an archway that hadn't existed a moment earlier. Their crystalline attire refracted the hall's colors into spectacular wave patterns. Attendants followed with resonance harps, literal instruments woven from crystallized sound. Edrin tried to follow along with the ceremony's customs, bowing, humming, participating in rituals that made his fillings buzz, but mostly he tried not to offend anyone or become the first human to trigger a galactic incident through rhythmic incompetence. 3 hours passed in a haze of impossible beauty. The hall sang. The walls refracted emotional tones. Creatures of every imaginable biology contributed harmonics to something ancient and transcendent. It was overwhelming. It was strange. It was stunning. And Edrin Vale, representative of humanity, sat in his lonely chair thinking. I hope the reception has food that won't kill me. As the ceremony finally transitioned into its conclusion and guests drifted toward the reception corridors, Edrin sighed in relief. He had survived the first half. He had no idea the night's most dangerous moment was still waiting for him, on a dance floor glowing with alien music and shadows where someone ancient and crimson-eyed had already noticed him. Edrin drifted with the stream of guests into the reception hall, a space even more bewildering than the ceremonial chamber. It stretched outward in a spiraling pattern, the walls shimmering like the inside of a geode. Tables curved around the perimeter, loaded with foods that looked delicious, confusing, or possibly lethal. Somewhere above, floating instruments created soft melodies by plucking vibrating strands of light. He told himself he'd just get a drink and hide quietly in a corner until it was socially acceptable to leave. The first part went well enough. He approached a table crowded with crystalline decanters and selected a glass of something roughly wine-colored. The liquid glowed faintly, swirling with particles of refracted starlight. He sniffed it, fruit. Nebula. Existential dread? Hard to tell. He sipped, winced, but not in a bad way. It tasted like a grape that had lived through a supernova and came out stronger for the experience. Drink secured, Edrin retreated to a quiet corner near an art installation that looked suspiciously like a levitating, humming jellyfish. He exhaled. Safe. Alone. Invisible. Good. Then the sensation hit. That instinctive prickling along the back of his neck. He wasn't alone. Someone was watching him. It wasn't a casual glance. It was precise. Focused. A gaze with intent. Edrin turned slowly. And the crowd parted. She glided forward like a dream wrapped in shadows. Tall. Pale. A presence that bent the room's attention around her without effort. Her hair was so black it seemed to absorb the light around it. Her dress looked like it had been woven out of dark matter and midnight. But the most impossible thing about her were her eyes, deep crimson, old enough to have witnessed empires rise and crumble into cosmic dust. A Seigneurie. Not just any Seigneurie. Lady Seraphis Nyx of House Carthane, if the briefing files were to be believed. And she was walking toward him. Directly toward him. Edrin's mouth went dry. He considered dropping his drink, then decided that was cowardly and unprofessional. Instead, he stood very still, hoping the universe might politely ignore him. Seraphis stopped precisely 3 feet away, exactly the distance recommended by the "Do not die horribly" section of the diplomatic notes. "You are the human envoy," she said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and cold in a strangely elegant way. His translator hardly had to work, her command of standard was near perfect. "Edrin Vale," he said, managing not to choke on the syllables. "And you're Lady Seraphis Nyx." "You're correct." Her head tilted slightly, assessing him with unnerving calm. "You've been standing alone for 52 minutes. Edrin blinked. She'd been watching him that long. "That is, correct," he said. "I'm observing the customs." Seraphis's expression flickered with what might have been amusement. "How convenient," she murmured. From a distance, diplomacy and social anxiety appear identical. Did a 600-year-old Seigneurie noblewoman just tease him? Edrin swallowed, trying to salvage the moment. "I'm strategically positioned," he said. "Better view. Faster access to refreshments. And yet," she observed, "you've been drinking that same glass for 49 minutes. The hesitation suggests either fear or uncertainty." His eyebrows rose. "Can't it be both?" This time she definitely smiled, a brief, glimmering thing that felt like watching a predator sheath its claws for a heartbeat. "How refreshing," she said softly. "Most diplomats would lie rather than reveal any weakness." "Oh, trust me, I'm not hiding anything. I normally negotiate mineral shipments with very polite asteroids. Asteroids are easy. They don't stare at you like they're deciding whether you'd pair well with a rare wine." Seraphis's laugh was low, warm, and shockingly real. Several nearby guests turned in shock, as if seeing a thunderstorm politely applaud. "I find you interesting, Edrin Vale," she said. "You're either remarkably brave or delightfully foolish." "Statistically speaking," he said, "I lean toward foolish." This earned him another flicker of a smile, brighter, unexpected. She extended a pale hand, palm up, elegant and motionless. The room felt like it collectively inhaled. "Dance with me," she said. Every diplomatic instinct Edrin possessed screamed. "Do not do that. Bad idea. She could kill you. You signed a waiver." But her eyes. They weren't hungry. They weren't cold. They were lonely, just for one beat, one flicker, one moment too fast to classify. He took her hand. The touch was cool, almost electric. Gentle, despite the strength he suspected lay beneath the surface. The music shifted into a slow rhythm, more pulse than melody, and Seraphis led him to the dance floor with fluid confidence. Every species present split apart like a tide around her. Edrin could feel eyes on them from all directions. A human and a Seigneurie noble dancing together at an Arkeli royal event. Someone was drafting diplomatic incident paperwork right now. He could guarantee it. Seraphis positioned his hands with expert precision, one on her waist, one holding her hand. He tried not to think about how her skin felt like moonlit marble warmed by starlight. The Archili waltz is simple, she murmured. 3 steps, turn. 3 steps, turn. Follow my lead. Just to clarify, Edrin said quietly, you're aware I'm catastrophically uncoordinated? I am, she replied. I find it charming. He stepped immediately on her foot. Her lips twitched. Try again. He tried. He failed. Then tried again. Each failure gentled her expression rather than hardening it. You're thinking too much, she guided softly. Let the music pull you. Trust the movement. I'm trying, he whispered. Good. Trust is more valuable than perfection. Her words carried the weight of centuries. It struck him that someone who had lived so long might rarely encounter genuine trust. He found the rhythm on the next attempt, awkward at first, then surprisingly natural. They turned together, the room drifting into a soft blur. The floor glimmered beneath their feet like liquefied crystal. Can I ask something? Edrin said. That depends, Seraphis replied. Why me? You could dance with anyone here. Seraphis's crimson eyes held him with a strangely vulnerable stillness. Because almost everyone fears me, she said softly. They see a Sanyuri first, a person never. But you, her fingers tightened slightly around his, you looked afraid, yet you still took my hand. Edrin felt a slow warmth rise in his chest. I don't think you're a monster. She inhaled, a delicate sound for someone with her presence. You barely know me, Edrin Vale. True, he said gently. But maybe that's how everything starts. For a moment, something ancient and lonely stirred behind her eyes, then softened. You surprise me, she whispered. They continued moving in graceful arcs, their steps synchronizing until Edrin wasn't thinking at all. Just feeling the quiet press of her hand. The subtle scent of midnight flowers. The impossible calm of being seen by someone who had witnessed centuries. When the music ended, neither of them moved. Seraphis's voice, quiet as starlight. There will be other diplomatic gatherings. If you attend. Her eyes held his. Save a dance for me. And before Edrin could answer, she released his hand with reluctant grace and disappeared into the crowd like a shadow dissolving into darkness. He stood there, breathless, stunned, human, while his heart tried to figure out what had just happened. Lady Seraphis Nyx had asked him for another dance. And the universe suddenly felt very different. Edrin didn't immediately return to the refreshment tables after Seraphis vanished into the crowd. He stood there in the center of the glowing dance floor, breathing as if he'd run a kilometer instead of gliding through a waltz. His pulse felt too loud, too present, too human. Around him, couples of every biology resumed their own movements, acting as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had. The Sanyuri noblewoman who terrified half the galaxy had asked him to dance. And then she'd asked for another someday. Edrin had the overwhelming suspicion that he was horribly, beautifully out of his depth. Delegate Vale. A soft voice rippled at his side. An Archili attendant, scales shimmering in concerned lilac tones, appeared as if summoned by his destabilized heart rate. Are you unwell? Your vitals indicate significant fluctuations. I'm fine, Edrin said, though he didn't sound remotely convincing. Just recalibrating. That is common after intense interactions with Sanyuri nobility, the attendant said sympathetically. They can be overwhelming. That felt like the understatement of the millennium. The attendant guided him toward a quieter area of the hall, where crystalline fruit trays glittered like edible constellations. Edrin's stomach reminded him that he hadn't eaten since some dim point in the last solar rotation. Seraphis had recommended the crystallized fruit. So, naturally, he grabbed one. It tasted like citrus poured through a star. Better than wine. Better than oxygen. He ate another. Then another. As he did, the edges of his vision sharpened, not blurred, not distorted, just sharpened. Colors grew deeper, richer, like the world had slightly adjusted its saturation. The ceiling's crystalline framework pulsed with soft harmonics timed to the music. Edrin let out a slow breath, feeling something tight in his chest finally uncoil. He wasn't sure whether to blame the fruit, the atmosphere, or the vampire woman who had upended his evening. The next few hours unfolded in a blur of diplomatic encounters he somehow navigated without disaster. Perhaps his near-death dance had temporarily rewired his social anxieties. Perhaps he was simply too dazed to care. Either way, he found himself speaking with beings he'd previously been terrified to even nod at. A Centauri merchant asked him about Earth's trade priorities. Two insectoid twins demanded an explanation of human mating rituals. He declined. A crystalline entity recited what he thought was poetry, though it might have been mathematical equations screamed in mineral frequencies. And yet, Edrin handled every exchange with calm he did not recognize as his own. But no matter who he spoke to, a part of him kept track of Seraphis. He wasn't staring. He wasn't following. He simply knew where she was, the way one might know where a candle sits in a dark room, its presence subtle but unmistakable. Twice across the hall, her crimson eyes met his. Twice she allowed the barest flicker of warmth to soften her expression before returning her attention to the dignitaries orbiting her like cautious moons. Edrin felt something complicated in his chest each time. Something he wasn't ready to name. Eventually his moment of dread arrived. His toast. He took the small stage, really just a raised platform grown from the crystal floor, and looked out at the crowd of alien dignitaries. His hands trembled once, then steadied. To our hosts, Edrin began in hierarchically. A ripple of polite surprise traveled through the room. To unity through resonance, may our voices harmonize rather than collide. He finished the short speech, and, miraculously, it worked. He didn't mispronounce anything catastrophic. Nobody hissed. Nobody fainted. A crystalline pillar pulsed pleasantly in approval. He stepped down with relief, scanning the crowd involuntarily. Seraphis wasn't watching his toast. But she was watching him now. Their gazes collided across the hall like two orbiting bodies finally aligning. She didn't smile, not fully, but the softening around her eyes conveyed everything. Approval. Amusement. Recognition. Something warm resting beneath her centuries-old austerity. Edrin felt his ears heat up. He pretended to study the food table again. By the time the reception wound down and guests drifted into private chambers or transport queues, Edrin found himself escorted to the shuttle bay by a pair of Archeli attendants. His feet ached from hours of standing, dancing, and trying not to disgrace humanity. But exhaustion didn't stop his mind from returning, again and again, to that dance. As he boarded the shuttle, he caught one last glimpse of Seraphis across the hall. She was in conversation with three dignitaries, tall, silver-skinned individuals whose voices produced harmonic chords instead of words. She didn't turn toward him, not immediately. Not until the last moment. Then she glanced his way. A brief, elegant acknowledgement. Her way of saying, "I did not forget." The shuttle doors closed, and the craft lifted away in a smooth arc. Hyperspace blurred around the transport on the return trip. Edrin sat quietly, attempting, unsuccessfully, to process the last 12 hours of his life. A Centauri trade minister sat across from him, polishing her data pad. At one point she glanced up and said, "You danced with Seraphis Nix." It wasn't a question. Edrin cleared his throat. "Ah, yes. Briefly. That's going to be talked about." She tapped the screen. "For a very long time. Is that good? Or catastrophic?" "That depends entirely," she said, "on what you intend to do next." Before he could ask what that meant, she returned to her reports, leaving him to drown in implications. Back on Earth, nothing made sense anymore. His old work, reviewing or quotas, translating dull subcommittee notes, felt impossibly small. He filled out his mission report meticulously, leaving out anything that resembled personal relevance. No mention of her hand in his. No mention of the way she'd said "save a dance for me." Definitely no mention of the sensation that something in him had shifted ever so slightly. Weeks passed. But the shift remained. His coworker Mara noticed before anyone else. "You've been staring into space for like 5 days straight," she said one afternoon. "What happened on Archiles? Did someone kiss you? Did you accidentally propose? Did you eat something sentient?" "It was just a dance," Edrin said, too quickly. Mara froze mid-sip of her coffee. "Oh no. You're in trouble." "I am not." "You absolutely are." She pointed an accusing finger. "Edrin Vale, you caught feelings for a 600-year-old Sanguri aristocrat." "I barely know her," he protested. "That's not a denial." Before he could assemble a defensible argument, his datapad chimed. A new message. Encrypted. Unknown origin. High priority. His breath caught. He opened it. Coordinates. A date 3 weeks from now. Proxima Station. Diplomatic Summit, Trade, Culture, Cross-Sector Relations. One line written in elegant, unmistakable script. "I hope you'll attend. The wine is terrible. But the company may not be. Seraphis." Edrin stared at the message for a long moment. Mara leaned in, eyes wide. "Oh. You're doomed. Emotionally doomed." Edrin didn't answer. Because he already knew he was going. Edrin prepared for Proxima Station like he was preparing for orbit re-entry without a heat shield. The summit itself was officially about trade corridors and cross-cultural frameworks, which meant long tables, long speeches, and long documents nobody would fully read. Unofficially, however, at least in the small private universe inside his chest, it was about one thing. Whether Lady Seraphis Nix had meant it. He threw himself into the practical parts first. That was easier. He studied Proxima's security protocols, memorized the layout of the central ring, reviewed dossiers on every attending delegation. He even scheduled time in the small embassy gym, because apparently dancing with ancient immortals required not only courage but also ankles that didn't crumble under pressure. At 2 in the morning, he dragged his coffee-fueled self into his living room, switched on some slow, old earth music, and practiced waltz steps in his socks. If his downstairs neighbors heard the soft thumping and occasional curse when he tripped over his own feet, they were kind enough not to complain. Mara watched him once from the doorway, arms crossed, expression half amused, half worried. "You know," she said, "most people dealing with complicated feelings talk to a therapist, not a playlist." "This is training," Edrin said. "For what? Heartbreak? For not stepping on her foot again?" She sighed and shook her head, but she didn't try to talk him out of going. When the day of departure finally arrived, she only punched his shoulder gently and said, "Try not to die, fall in love catastrophically, or trigger a multi-sector diplomatic crisis. In that order." "I'll aim for only mild catastrophe," he replied. Proxima Station hung in space like a metal ring threaded with light. The shuttle slotted into one of the docking spokes, and the familiar sequence of gravity shifts and pressure checks took place. As the doors hissed open, Edrin stepped into a corridor that smelled faintly of recycled air, machine oil, and 1,000 past conversations. The summit venue occupied the station's central atrium, a huge cylindrical space whose inner surface was lined with terraces, plants, and banners representing half the known political blocs. Delegates floated or walked along the rotating ring, depending on how seriously their species took gravity. Edrin checked in with the human delegation, got his badge, avoided the coffee machine, he had enough adrenaline already, and tried not to overtly scan the crowd for a particular silhouette of darkness and light. The opening sessions were exactly as dry as expected. Speeches about cooperation. Charts about trade routes. A particularly long slide presentation about tariffs on exotic gases. Edrin took notes like a professional, nodded at the correct moments, and contributed a brief comment about Earth's minor shipping lanes. But beneath the calm surface of his diplomatic mask, another part of him listened for footsteps that weren't footsteps, for a voice that had once made a crystalline hall feel strangely small. He saw her before he heard her. Seraphis entered the atrium flanked by two members of House Carthane, both dressed in muted formal attire that shouted very important to anyone who knew Sanguri fashion. Her presence reshaped the room the way gravity shapes orbit. Conversations adjusted around her, trajectories bent without anyone consciously deciding to move. She wore deep indigo this time, edged with faint silver threads that looked like captured starlight. Her hair was still midnight. Her eyes were still crimson. And when those eyes swept across the gathered delegates and landed on him, Edrin felt like someone had briefly opened an airlock in his chest. She did not immediately approach. Of course she didn't. She was Sanguri nobility. People came to her. She spoke with station officials, shook hands with a Kasari trade prince, paused to exchange quiet words with the Centauri minister from the Arkeli wedding, who, Edrin noticed, gave him a tiny, knowing nod. Only after the formalities settled, after the crowd's initial curiosity shifted back into the rhythm of the summit, did Seraphis begin walking in his direction. He felt suddenly aware of his posture, his breathing, the way his heart seemed to have abandoned all pretense of professionalism. He reminded himself he was a trained envoy, representing a whole planet, and not a flustered teenager hoping to look cool in front of the most intimidating person in any room. "Envoy Vale," she said when she reached him. "Lady Seraphis," he replied, grateful that his voice didn't crack. "You came," she observed. "You invited me," he said, then grimaced. "I mean. Yes. I did." A hint of that quiet, dangerous amusement curved her lips. "I did not order you here, Edrin. You chose to come. That is not a small distinction." He wanted to say something clever, but his brain decided now was a good time to replay their entire first dance at high speed. What came out instead was, "The wine is indeed terrible." Her eyes brightened, just a fraction. "I warned you." They stood there for a few moments, surrounded by the polite chaos of the summit, as if the rest of the station had faded to background noise. Then Seraphis inclined her head slightly toward the upper terraces. "There is an observation ring overlooking the docking spokes," she said. "Quieter. Less, observed." For a second, his training flared, those old warning lines from the Arkeli briefing, "Do not accept private invitations. Maintain distance. Avoid isolation." Then he remembered her voice on the dance floor, saying, "Terrifying doesn't mean empty," and the way his world had felt larger afterward, not smaller. "Lead the way," he said. The observation ring was a long, curved corridor of transparent alloy, giving them a view of ships gliding in and out of the docking arms, small sparks of metal and light against the black. Down below, shuttle thrusters flared like shooting stars caught on repeat. They walked side by side in companionable silence for a while. Seraphis's hands were folded behind her back, her gaze thoughtful. "I read your follow-up report on Arkeli trade," she said eventually. Edrin blinked. "That was, classified at level 3. She lifted an eyebrow. "House Carthane deals in information. We specialize in learning what people consider important enough to hide. I'm not sure anyone has ever used the words important and my paperwork in the same sentence before." "You are wrong," she said. "Your perspective was unusually honest. You observed with curiosity instead of contempt. Many diplomats collect cultures like trophies. You treated them like neighbors." He hadn't expected that. Praise, maybe. Teasing, certainly. But that simple, steady respect. "Is that why you asked for another dance?" he asked quietly. "Because I write decent reports." "No," she said. They stopped walking. She turned to face him fully now, crimson eyes calm and unflinching. I asked because, Seraphis said slowly, for the first time in decades, I did not feel like a monster being evaluated or a weapon being measured. You were afraid, yes, but you still looked at me as if I were simply, someone. Edrin swallowed. You are someone. She considered that, as if trying the idea on like a new garment. I have watched centuries of negotiations, she murmured. Treaties forged. Alliances betrayed. I have seen mortals live entire lives in the space between two of my decisions. Eternity can begin to feel like a very large, very echoing room. She held his gaze. People speak to my power, my influence, my bloodline. You spoke to me. There it was again, that flicker of loneliness behind the iron and silk. Seraphis, he said softly, using her name without title for the first time, you do realize I'm just, me? A minor envoy from a barely relevant planet who still counts steps in his head when he dances. I know, she said. And that is precisely why I find you, grounding. The word landed between them with unexpected weight. I cannot promise anything simple, she continued, voice quieter now. Politics will swirl. Mortality will complicate. Some species will talk. Others will whisper. House Carthane is very good at surviving scandal, but you may find it uncomfortable. He laughed once, softly. My current life consists of mineral contracts, empty apartments, and reheated noodles. Uncomfortable sounds like an improvement. Her lips curved again, this time without any sharpness at all. Edrin Vale, she said, would you care to dance again, somewhere slightly less crystalline and slightly more prone to creaky floor panels? He looked around. The observation ring was empty, quiet, bathed in starlight reflected from distant ships. No music, no formal floor, no Archeli resonance. He offered his hand. Teach me something that doesn't risk offending 6 different empires with my footwork. This is Proxima Station, she said, placing her cool hand in his. Nobody cares about your feet. They began to move slowly there in the corridor, to the distant rhythm of docking thrusters and the faint murmur of the station's life support. No formal steps, no official pattern, just 2 figures circling gently in low gravity while the universe spun lazily on outside. He stumbled once. She steadied him. She hesitated once, and he simply waited. Whatever this is, he said eventually, we don't have to name it yet. That seems wise, she replied. They kept moving. Not a fairy tale ending. Not yet. Maybe never. Life, especially with ancient immortals and fragile humans in the mix, rarely arranges itself into neat conclusions. But in that moment, on a metal ring hanging in the dark, Edrin Vale danced with Lady Seraphis Nyx again, and the echoing room of her eternity felt, if only for a while, a little less empty. And for now, that was enough. So that's where we'll leave them for now, a human envoy who thought his destiny was spreadsheets and safe assignments, and an immortal Sanguri noble who spent centuries being treated like a myth or a weapon, quietly sharing a clumsy, unpolished dance on an observation deck above the stars. No grand declarations. No universe-shaking twist. Just 2 people from wildly different timelines deciding that maybe, just maybe, they're willing to see what happens next. If you enjoyed drifting through this slower, more intimate corner of the galaxy, where the real tension isn't just between empires but inside 2 very confused hearts, then you're exactly the person I'm telling this to. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes after this summit, or what other strange corners of the universe we stumble into next. If there was a moment in this story that hit you, a line that stuck, a scene you could picture so clearly you felt like you were there in the Crystal Palace or watching the ships dock outside Proxima, go ahead and drop a like. It sounds small, but it genuinely helps push this kind of long-form sci-fi storytelling out to more people who love slow-burn character arcs as much as you do. And finally, if someone popped into your mind while listening to this, a friend who's into alien politics, immortal vampires, awkward diplomats, or just quietly emotional space romances, share this video with them. Send it to one person who'd appreciate a story where the biggest leap isn't across a star system, but across the invisible distance between two people. Thanks for spending your time in this little slice of the galaxy with me. I'll see you in the next story.